So, greetings of the day, everyone. Warm welcome in another episode of CENJOWS podcast series. I am Deepak Tiwari, Technical Research Assistant at Center for Joint Warfare Studies, Headquarter Integrated Defense Staff, Ministry of Defense. Today, I invite you to a very specifically, odd subject uh, where we are going to, talk about the absolute core of India's strategic future. The topic for this podcast is trajectory of defense innovation in India, challenges and opportunity. For decade, India's defense R&D has often operated on a crisis-cornered model, reacting to the sudden wars episodes where we shift our policy planning from the beginning. There's a book called India's Defense Planning by Dr. Lakshman Kumar Behra, which aptly records this trajectory of defense planning and how it has uh, very discrete and not very in dynamic flow. With that, I would like to welcome our guest, Mr. Navneet Bhushan. Uh, Welcome you, sir, on behalf of CENJOWS. It's a great pleasure to have you with us for this podcast.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Mr. Navneet Bhushan is currently serving as a founder director of Crafitti Consulting Pvt Ltd, which is an innovation, strategy, and intellectual property research, consulting, and training firm. He's a leading expert with more than 3 decades of experience in research and consultation on innovation, patent portfolio management, software development, and IP analysis. He started with his career as a scientist at DRDO's Institute of System Studies and Analysis from 1990 to 2000, the most interesting time, I might add.
Yeah.
Sir holds a postgraduate diploma in IPR law from NLSIU Bangalore, a diploma in patent information from the Netherlands, MTech in computer science and engineering from IIT Madras, and MSc in software science from Allahabad University. He's an advisor to deep technology companies such as Eclipse Tech and Sierra Aerospace. His corporate journey includes Infosys, Philips, Wipro, and Hexaware, besides serving as the India CEO for 3X. Mr. Navneet is a visiting faculty for warfare simulation and strategies for AmTech Defense Technology and for strategic design management at the prestigious National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. Uh, he has joined recently as adjunct professor at the prestigious National Institute of Advanced Science, Bangalore. He has authored more than 65 technical research papers and is an invited speaker for various international and national conferences. He has been interviewed on Indian national television as a patent expert and on All India Radio as an innovation expert. Recently, Navneet sir has been conferred the Entrepreneurial Innovation and Leadership Award for the year 2012 as well. So welcome you, sir. Uh, I'll start our discussion by first asking you about about this term that you usually refer in your articles and talks, the sixth wave of innovation. So, sir, talk us through what is the sixth wave of innovation, how it come to the sixth, and what are the implications for India?
First of all, thank you, Deepak, and also Sanjos. It's really a privilege and also absolute joy to join you, and also a very interesting topic. And I'm sort of fascinated by the way you have sort of designed this questionnaire and also the subject, so to say. And I think we need to do some justice to the topic, obviously. So that will be our endeavor. So specifically on the sixth wave of innovation and also the whole point about why this shift. And in fact, this year, Economic Nobel Prize has been won by on a topic called creative destruction. And that was a term that was coined by, Schumpeter, who was an economist in 1930s. And he basically talked about picked up research by a Russian, Kondratev, saying that history and economics for capitalistic system keeps on changing, keeps on evolving. It's a regular evolution of the economic system. And within the system, that new technologies are created on its own through the capitalistic mechanisms. And in that sort of a uh, newer technologies, evolution, new waves or new ways of creating economic value are created. And in that sort of a process, every few decades, there is what he called the creative destruction. That means the existing economic system sort of is destroyed or systematically disrupted, and ultimately eliminated, and there's a new system that actually comes up for the economic value creation through with newer technologies. And he in fact talked about the first industrial revolution and then multiple waves of evolution, or what he calls those waves of innovation, because innovation he defines as creative change in the way economic production or the methods of economic productions are changed. So we actually looked at this particular evolution, and in fact, 1990, it was sort of said that 1990, 1991, we actually started with what is called the fifth wave of innovation, driven by software, networks, and new media, or networks, specifically the internet, so to say. And earlier waves were like 1950 to 1990. It was the fourth wave of innovation driven by aero, uh, I mean, aircraft, and also what we call uh, the chemicals or the plastics, and also some sort of a electronics, so to say. Driven. And previous waves were electricity, and before that, it was steam and also different type of technologies, railroad, so to say. So if you really look at this particular sort of evolution in this theoretical lens of how the world has changed, or the capitalistic system has created newer technologies from within, and you see that every few decades the world changes, and there is this creative destruction. And when we looked at some of the patent trends that we were studying as a part of our company, inventions trends, from our analysis in terms of the patents that are filed or also available, we actually sort of figured out that we are, around 2015, we basically started saying that we are entering a sort of a transition period or transformation period. And when we looked at this particular work from Peter Schumpeter, the Schumpeter's waves, as they are called, we realized that we actually are mapping to that particular thing. So and when we looked at the theory and the five waves of innovation, we said that 1990, the wave that started, which they are calling the fifth wave, is going to be over in 2020. Okay, so that was sort of the timeline that they're given, about 30 years. And earlier waves were 50 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 55 years, this sort of it. So it is shrinking. This period of transformative change of the world is shrinking, so to say. So when we looked at that, we sort of said that 2020, if it is going to change, what are the technologies which are going to be the next wave of innovation? And so we sort of said that the sixth wave of innovation will be driven by these trends that we are seeing. And we actually estimated these particular various technologies which are going to define the next wave of innovation. So
The
that we call
technology
the
that we called
sixth wave of it.
sixth wave innovation, and the technology nowadays are being called critical, emerging, disruptive. Lots of terminology have been given to these
That's
types.
right. But in
Yeah,
that particular analysis, what we found was that very actually we got a very specific set of ways in which humanity is solving that inventive problems in making things nano. At the nano level, making things autonomous. Giving them more and more intelligence to operate in the context in which they are operating, more and more networked, and also hypersonic, which is, five times speed of sound. That sort of a first level of sort of traction that we are seeing where the effort has been spent. But it is through a new type of computing, and which was what we call the algorithmic computing. Of course, the AI is artificial intelligence, as they're saying. So we said it's algorithmic intelligence is what we coined. But it is basically AI because it was sort of a misnomer. Then around 2025 onwards, we said that the computing itself is going to evolve to quantum computing, and then it was going to give us new ability to synthesize biology, energy, and also reality. In fact, we will have different type of virtual realities. I mean, even fake realities and also deep fakes also, as we have found. And this is what we were started saying or sort of talking about in 2015 onwards. And in fact, we actually had a sort of a timeline of this sixth wave, 2020 to 2045, because if you look at the previous wave, they are reducing. I mean, 30 years, 1990 to 2020, and I mean, this we are saying at least, okay, let us call 25 years, we are going to see this sort of evolution. So this is the background of what we call the sixth wave of innovation. And the technologies are very interesting because when we started digging out what exactly is happening in these patent trends, and we were able to sort of glean the trends and also sort of show that this is the possible way in which these technologies are going to shape the new way of economic production, which is as per Schumpeter and Kondratev.
So
Not
you
sure whether I answered the question or
interestingly
not.
the interestingly the trains of patents.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that. It's an interesting thing you mentioned. But sir, for starters, innovation. We talk about corporate innovation. We understand it in that way. Mostly the theories around the innovation are built around corporate innovation, and innovation, for example, to me is like a word freedom. Everyone has different meanings to freedom. Similarly, innovation as well. So, sir, my first question would be to how would you distinct between the defense innovation and the innovation happening in the corporate sector, private sector, startups and all? Uh, are there any theoretical backing for that? For example, you mentioned Schumpeter's creative destruction. Uh, it explains the evolution of technologies properly, innovation as well. But the defense innovation itself, since the beginning, it has been bringing out the most critical technology, including internet and touch screen technology, and everything we see and use nowadays has came from the defense innovation structure complete in different countries. But I don't think we have a specific theoretical explanation as to how these technologies are evolving and what are the core of these technologies, and how we approach as a nation to make ourselves, get a strategic edge through these defense innovation. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Thank you. First of all, I think it's a very, very apt question to calibrate the context in which the military systems or military ecosystem works versus the corporate, so-called the business system, if you may. Of course, the capitalistic business system is what we are talking about, not the government-driven socialistic systems of communist countries, which of course are more driven by the state, so to say. Here we are talking about private sort of a uh, entrepreneurial capitalistic mechanism that uh, actually is what defines the capitalistic system. So first of all, look at the goals, objectives, and drivers of both the sort of context, right? I call it the God, goals, objective, and drivers, God of innovation for private sector and also the military or the defense area. Now, the obvious sort of a reason why a private sector or a company, which actually is in the open sort of a space where customers are there, other companies are there. So obviously, their main purpose of existing is to serve the customers and make profit. So the God goals, objectives, and drivers for the private company is the profit, maximize the profit, right? I mean, that is what, and also they have to compete with the competing offers that the adversaries or competitors, they call it, will provide to the same customers. Set of customers are same for both. And how do we compete? How do we position our product and services which are different from the others which are offering? And that is where the competitive advantage that we have is needs to be defined and also maximized, and then of course projected and utilized for profit. So that is the business driver or the goals objective drivers for the private company. But in the case of military systems, we do not have anything like a profit type of thing, right? The military systems exist, or the military forces, or they are maintained specifically after the nation state came into existence 500 years back, compared to the kingdoms that used to be there. Now, of course, we have a nation state system where, I mean, it is sort of a people of the nation are having armies which will be utilized for, I mean, utilized for organizing destructive capability or defense capability against any adversary who is going to attack or sort of get into a situation which is the war type of situation. So here objective is not profit. The goals, objective, drivers for the defense is victory, and that is where the difference actually is very big difference. Here we are not talking about that we are going to get so much of profit by making this particular product or deploying this particular product. So that is where the, however, there is something called competitive advantage, and competitive advantage in this case also we need to really build certain advantages in our defense mechanism or defense organization or the military organization in such a way that this particular advantage with respect to the adversary, which we are going to face in the future in some form or in the battlefield or battle space or war or combat, that particular advantage is maximized for us, and that should result into victory. Now, here the concept of profit is not there, right? I mean, it is more about victory, and that is what we are driven by. Now, how do we really sort of differentiate? And here the concept of innovation becomes sort of different, because something like a war situation private companies do not have in their concept, right? I mean, they do not have a concept of a battlefield, although they keep on talking, picking up these terms from the military sort of a jargon and sort of using its strategies, battles, and all those sort of things. But they do not really have a battlefield where organized violence is utilized for political purposes, right? I mean, that sort of a way most of the, I mean, private sector do not have. They are driven by, I mean, as I said, profit, and also their sort of a focus is on competitive advantage with respect to maximizing profit and also delivering better value, different value, and maybe innovative way in which they can deliver. Here in the private, in the defense sector, we have a three, four type of a things. Here we have a innovation during the peacetime, innovation during the wartime, and innovation because or driven by technology, as you said, technological innovations, as you said, internet or even the space type of things, also in other sectors. So there is a big difference in terms of that context in which these defense operations will be there. So during the peacetime, we obviously need to really figure out how will the future war be, and that of course is the driver. Now it, I mean, it's extremely difficult to say that the next war that I'm going to fight will be like this ABC, right? It will typically be what I have fought in XYZ, or I mean earlier wars, whatever I have fought, I have to sort of pick up that some lessons from that and say that this is what will be the most likely way in which the future war will be, although it has been shown in history that no war is repeating. I mean, there is no repetitive way in which it is not a sort of a science or physics that exactly you can not helicopter drop the previous war into a new war. And of course, obviously, there is a shift. So here the drivers are, how do we perceive the future war? What are the officers, military officers who are really thinking? I mean, how do we really bring those new type of thinking to the officer corps, which are actually trained for the older way? So the doctrine evolution during the peacetime uh, will define what sort of innovation will be there. Secondly, when the, yeah.
On that note, see, historically, India's defense, R&D evolved around these, as I mentioned, the crises that keep happening. 62 war, 71 war, 99, and then we had a nuclear test, and subsequently there were lots of hurdles. There's a change in government policies and everything. So. In today's landscape of border securities and the sort of hybrid challenges that we have with these technologies, internal and external issues all mixing together, there's a gray zone, and lots of things are merging together nowadays. Very hard to distinguish what are our threats and what are who are the opponents, who are the adversaries. uh, so sir, in today's landscape, are we successfully building cohesive technologies? I mean, earlier we used to buy whatever we needed. We bought tanks, ships, and fighters, because at that time we were in the need of those, because we had our learning from the past wars. But nowadays, we are running towards, maybe in my perspective, towards these new technologies, artificial intelligence. Drones are there, hypersonic laser weapons. So we are picking these technologies because the whole world is going towards that, and that is the narrative now, that these technologies will not just change the war, the way we live and perceive things as well. So do we think, are we still in that same paradigm, where we want some technologies because we didn't have, because others have, we want to counter those technologies, we need to counter certain threats, traditional, non-traditional, but we are not out of that whole paradigm still? Do you think we are moving towards that, or are we still stuck in that?
Okay, I think this is the quite a very apt question for India specifically,
Exactly.
given that we are like 80 years old country, I mean nation in terms of post-independence, so to say, and also the earlier days that we had, other challenges were there. So obviously the military capabilities and sort of military R&D also was very specific to the specific needs, as you said, as you mentioned clearly. And so in that sense, from our stance and also our the development cycles, as we can say, or the R&D cycles, India has been a reactive sort of a player. Now, what I mean by that is, obviously, as you said, the crisis that we face, or the crisis that became wars and also different types of lessons that emerged, we have to sort of react to that, so that we develop our capabilities by learning from our crisis that we have. Obviously, that has been the case. So, but I mean, there has been a change, and of course, the change is in thinking about how do we really leapfrog from what type of reactive mechanisms we have, and how do we develop our own capabilities. So the self-reliance, or Atmanirbharta as we're calling it, has been a sort of a running theme. So I distinctly remember in 1990s also we have a concept called, and in fact Dr. Kalam used to talk about it, the self-reliance index. And in fact that was really about that we were at, I mean, most of the newer systems that India was developing, and we actually used to sort of look at that the technologies that goes into that were about 30% of our own. So that was a 30% self-reliance, I mean, to the critical technologies that we. So aim was to get to the 70% actually. I mean, that was in 1990s, I distinctly remember. In fact, in 2014 or 15, I think Deputy NSA's article, Dr. Arvind Gupta's article was there, which actually mentioned about that we are still at about 30-40% only now. So that means the challenge obviously is that we sort of define and build those technologies which are needed for the previous generation of the equipment that we actually are fielding. And by that time, others, of course, who are defining the future, or who have these technologies which are with the vision of defining the future, and who are not reacting but designing the future, they define what will be the so-called future. And that, of course, was the critical sort of a difference, I would say. But what has changed in last 20 years approximately or so is the need for defining our own future. And I very distinctly remember Dr. Shivtanu Pillai telling me, who was the father of BrahMos missile in 1990s, which is, of course has proven its metal, so to say, in the recent Operation Sindoor last year. And he actually said that, in fact, it is in his book also, that the way BrahMos missile was developed, and it sort of indicates that India was thinking ahead, and India had some sort of a way to develop that. Of course, it has a a requirement of a political will, because the government that time and the prime minister actually of that time, I think PV Narasimha Rao, he actually was the architect of uh, creating that special vehicle, which became the BrahMos missile, is what we have. So BrahMos, I think, is a very important test case for us to see the successful way in which India was able to sort of define some aspect of future, because Tomahawk missile, which was subsonic, which was used in 1991 Gulf War, and of course we talked about Mach 3 type of a cruise missile, which BrahMos became, and which of course is defining what we have. But having said that, uh, in overall scheme of things, unless we define the way in which we are going to fight on our own definition, our own theory of war, a theory of victory, theory of fighting, how, of course, then of course we get into the doctrinal and also what is called the operational way in which, or the operational art in which we are going to sort of utilize the resources to achieve victory vis-a-vis adversaries. Till we actually do that, it will continue to be reactive and piecemeal, as you said. This is my view, of course. But having said that, how do we really get to that level of saying that we are going to define, India is going to define the next so-called revolution in military affairs, if you may, the RMA, is really, I think, the challenge, because in the type of focus that we had so far, because of the challenges that India had earlier of other aspects, so it became very difficult. But I think time has come to move towards defining and designing the future that we want to design. So of
Yes.
course it will take time.
Sir, you bring a profound experience and understanding on innovation framework globally. Uh, you developed, and I've been following your work. You developed the concept of inventive energy to track the global patent trends, as you mentioned earlier. If we look beneath the India's defense sector, we see a lot of pride in assembling platforms domestically. But from an intellectual property standpoint, do we actually own the core IP of these critical subsystems, uh, which are driving our defense innovation, are as our plans are would be the foundation of our future battle machines. So, sir, my question is, are we mostly innovators at the integration level? Does innovation in India, in the defense sector, also ascribe to IP based or IP protected incremental development, or are we just assembling and trying to build something that can help us in our current deficiencies in weapon systems and all? So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think once again, very interesting point, because uh, as I said, globalization started in 1990s, and India sort of globalized through that 1991 or the initial 90s way in which our economic system got sort of connected to the global system. And in that, there was a requirement of what is called the TRIPS agreement for IP related harmonizing our laws with respect to the global laws, or your WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization. So India actually signed the TRIPS agreement, and also our patent law, for example, sort of evolved to what they were, to what we had. But in 2003, we had our first patent act, patent sort of a, I mean, which was the reformatted 20 years patent rights that we had. And coming to, so what I'm trying to say is that it's a relatively a recent phenomena, specifically the patents for the private sector. But from the DRDO, which has been the premier sort of organization for looking at the next projects, I think intellectual property rights in the globalizing system was not too much the focus. It was always creating our own inventions, own solutions, because we had the problem of the import issues, right? So we could not import, and so there was always a restriction when it comes to actual operation. We need to have our own sort of capability. So that somehow has been ingrained, that we need to develop our own sort of capabilities, technologies, and also our own systems as far as possible. But obviously, given the restrictions and also given the limitations, it was not really the case that we could do everything on our own. That's where the 30% SRI, the self-reliance index of 30% becoming 70% is still sort of a, I mean, it's being sort of worked out, but we are still a little far off from that. But having said that, specifically on the patents and the IP based sort of a way of developing our defense capabilities. So I think if you pick up the philosophy with which Defense Research Development Organization in India developed, and also even ISRO also, I mean, from the that or even a nuclear organization, all the three main scientific organizations, they were having this particular sort of a mindset that we are going to collaborate with others, but our main is to develop our own solutions, our own technologies, and our own ways, because we had very clearly seen in the past what happens when we are dependent. And obviously, the dependencies create some sort of a friction and also restrictions and constraints when it comes to actually getting value of that particular system. So the things are changing, but I'm not I cannot really, of course, I'm not having too much of experience of how much the IP in the private sector, specifically for defense, is being utilized. Specifically, however, I have some views about the way in which some of these technologies and these solutions are being built on. However, mindset has to be from everyone. I mean, the whole ecosystem mindset has to be shifted towards creating our own IP. And this, I think, requires a mindset change of I mean, the word that is coming to my mind is what the Jews or the Yiddish use or Israelis use called the chutzpah. Chutzpah is basically saying the almost like a almost arrogance, but audacity. Audacity to think beyond what is existing. Audacity to say that I am going to be the creator of something new. That audacity has to become a national character. Of course, I mean, Israel, which is such a small country, has that national character. Some level of that audacity has to be brought into our people who are building this. So I think this requires us to bring that capability and also backed by the the processes and the methods to develop this ecosystem and build this IP-based system, IP-based technological systems, and also IP-based mechanisms of building stronger IP. So here, once again, the one specific point I would like to qualify, specifically when we did this inventive energy uh, metric. By the way, inventive energy metric, we found that it is, I mean, people actually estimate how many number of patents are granted or how many patent applications are filed per year as a metric. But there is, of course, the process itself has a sort of a issue, because when you file a particular patent application, there are some 1 to 5 years that the patent is granted by the patent office. So there is a gap. So the same application, when it is granted, there will be a gap of about 5 years. I mean, 1 to 5 years. And also the type of claims that you actually write in your application, not all of them will be granted. So there is some sort of a impedance in terms of what you claim as your application or as your invention actually is much more reduced when you are granted that. So if you really want to measure it, you need to measure the specific set of applications in that year, specific set of patents, and also you need to sort of look at the previous 5 years also as a metric for, let us say, 2025. What is the innovative or the inventive mechanism? You need to really look at the last 5 years with recency weighted sort of thing. And that is exactly we created this metric. We have written 2 books on that actually, on how inventive energy can be utilized. And given that, we really see that even the patents that we actually are reading, they are just level 1, level 2. I mean, very low level. I mean, overall. So if we really want to invent, and that is where the audacity part comes into picture, there are 5 levels that have been defined in the past about inventiveness. So we need to really invent strong. How do we invent strong? Will be defining how good is our technology, how long it will continue, and how much it defines the future. So how do we invent strong is where we need to really bring these young people, young inventors, and actually give them this science of inventing stronger than what you have. And that is exactly what we need to build into the ecosystem.
So that's very interesting. I think this parameter, this criteria you talk of, we can so in some way we can use in our IDEX platform, and startups that we are encouraging to innovate, uh, to guide them that innovation needs to be at certain level, not just the basics. We need to go beyond and gain a strategic edge, not just keep filling the gaps that we used to have, and now broads are gaps are broadening with each day. So coming to our last question, sir, what do you suggest to our policymakers on making innovation in defense a hurdle-free, liberal, and highly infectious culture? Because it has to be a culture. People need to be in this mindset that if you want to go into enter into defense sector, you need to come with a new technology, new innovation that will give the country an edge that other countries don't have. We need to have this mindset in sort of a culture. So, what are your suggestion to our policymakers to inculcate that culture? And how do you see the next great war machines and the Lockheed Martins of US and all emerging from India?
Okay, I think this has a very deeper question, and also what I call the wicked problem of national security. Wickedness is basically saying that defining the problem itself is a problem in terms of the culture, right? Culture is a very peculiar type of a thing, and also changing cultures is really a long drawn process. But having said that, you can always build pockets of the novelty, pockets of the newness, pocket of the freedom, as you rightly said initially. How do we really build that freedom for people to imagine, people to think, and people to have that audacity or the chutzpah to really do the next? Now, this is of course the big question about, it will require money, it will require ideas, that has to be strong ideas or well thought out ideas, and also it will require action, converting those money and ideas together into solutions for the potential problems of future. Now in that context, I would say that if we define a sort of a overall framework of how India is going to be secured, safe, and also defended in next 25 years or so, then I think that framework can give us a sort of a way to have a target. And in that, I think we have actually proposed in our one of our articles that maybe just like what US thought about what is called the conventional prompt global strike, which is their sort of early century, I mean 21st century when it started, they came up with CP. Uh, s- uh, Conventional Prompt Global Strike, CPGS, which was basically saying that any part of the world, any part of the globe, we should be able to neutralize, I mean, any point within 1 hour of the input, right? I mean, that sort of a. So we actually picking up that particular framework. Of course, they are still way. I mean, I don't think they have that capability to the extent that they thought they will have. But having said that, I think we can pick up that as a sort of a base and sort of say instead of not global, but we can have a conventional prompt regional defense, which is basically saying, let us say, n kilometers from India, how if any particular threat is going to emanate, I mean, in any form, how do we really, first of all, find out that this is going to be an intended threat and is going to be harmful for us? Then, of course, build up ways, means, and techniques of neutralizing it in some specific time that we can build. And over a period of time, we improve this particular capability and increase this conventional prompt regional defense into maybe a strike also, but definitely conventional prompt regional defense. Now, if we have this framework or this vision of how we are going to do, in all the domains, space, cyber, and also the next one, which is the quantum cyber, which is basically at the material level. We are going to give intelligence to the atoms, so to say, and to make small machines, nano level machines or nanometers machines, which will be very different type of weapons, so to say. How do we really defend against that? I mean, how do we really defend against those possible threats which are going to come, including the biological threats, which will become, quite pronounced, as we have seen in the past also. So how do we really sort of build these, sort of a, if we have the goal, if we have the architecture defined for future, then I think the culture can be built, so to say. I would sort of suggest that, if okay, I don't know whether we need to call it a policy, guys, or also whoever is going to decide, right? Or whoever is going to sort of define. So maybe, in fact, I proposed in one of the articles long back, about a decade back, that India should have a Ministry of Innovation, Design, and Futures, and that will define what it will be. To some extent, I presume Niti Aayog is supposed to do that, 15 years look ahead, but not very sure whether they are focused on safety, security, and defense also, or focused on creating a secure nation, or safe nation, or building, protecting us from all sort of multi-domain threats that we have. I think if we have the architecture defined with the vision of what it should be, then of course the culture can be sort of at least tweaked, I would say.
That is very innovative insight, sir. To have a Ministry of Innovation, Niti Aayog is there, but I believe the term innovation needs to be there to, inculcate the culture, the idea, the concept that innovation is there. It's talking about innovation. So,
Innovation and design, I would say. Innovation, design, and futures. That's what.
so I believe, I think that there's a need of a vision, that transcends the current needs and threats and, security paradigms, and look ahead, way ahead. Uh, as we wrap up today's discussion, it is evident that India's defense innovation trajectory is at the crossroad. There's a lot of progress that I see in form of initiatives that have been taken by the Ministry of Defense and the IDEX, Defense Innovation Organization. We have a Defense Innovation Organization, and but still, I believe coming from your inputs, there's a lot more to go, lot more head to go. With that, sir, I would conclude the discussion. My sincere thanks to Mr. Navneet Bhushan for these invaluable insights. Thank you for tuning into CENJOWS podcast series, everyone. Stay secure. Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you.